Untouchable, uncrushable. Untouchable, uncrushable. Untouchable, uncrushable. Untouchable, uncrushable. Down, face down. You know the routine.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of Pan and Zoom. I'm your host, Sati Gossett, where we talk to creatives about their story, their journey, and their breakthroughs. Today we have a wonderful guest, screenwriter and novelist, Cliff Dorfman. How you doing, Cliff?
Very good. Thank you, Sadi.
And, on the show, we talk about creatives, about their craft, how they got there. And in this instance, what was their kind of aha moment? Were you sitting in the theater at 8 and Cinema Paradiso came on? It's like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. That wasn't me, but what was yours?
You're not incredibly far off. I was sitting in the theater. I maybe was 6 or 7 years old. I think it was the first thing was either The Omen in the theater with Gregory Peck or Chinatown. And I was watching that and going, I need to understand how this is done. There was a moment where these glass mirrors or something slid and sliced off someone's head in The Omen. And I was very cognizant that it wasn't real, even at a young age, but I was obsessed with immediately how this happens and how these stories get told, and the more I would unpack it, the more I would want to understand the way stories propelled the action, stories propelled the characters, stories propelled the entire engine of the project, and then how they propelled the entire business. So it was this sort of building block moment as opposed to this aha moment. And then there was Rocky, and then there was Apocalypse Now. And who later John Milius ended up being a mentor of mine, the writer of Apocalypse Now.
Wow. Just to backtrack, you come from my generation where we could go to movies like that on our own at that age.
Right.
Like, I have children and I wouldn't let them do that.
Didn't let my kid walk down the block at that age.
I'm going to go watch The Fly with Jeff Goldblum.
Yep. Right. I mean, oh my God, I remember seeing that in the theater. But that was the other thing too. We had the theaters, and so I had the babysitter or the older sisters, or but even my parents at the time, they would, because they didn't have a babysitter, so they're like, well, you're going to the movies. Like that's it. Wherever we're seeing, you're seeing, and it was to my great pleasure that I got to do that.
Sometimes the movies was the babysitter.
Well, yeah, that was.
And I had multiple babysitters because back then we could sneak into the next film.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I would do in Fresh Meadows. I'd go see my grandma Sylvia, and it was in Queens, and then I would go into it started out as a 2-plex, and then it got built into a 4-plex, and then it was right there, and so I would run into each theater, and there was no security.
Yeah, security was lax at
They didn't care.
Yeah,
It was kids
yeah.
running it.
It was akin to having someone go into the liquor store to buy a beer, and you draw on the fake mustache. But I digress. Let's get back to John's
Farm for
Boone Farm, right? Yes.
Apple Boone's Farm.
You are full Queens. Let's get back to John Milius and the whole mentorship angle. Tell me how important that is as a writer coming up. Because there's this veil. You say, hey, I want to do that, but how do I get there? And after you talk about it, I want to talk about another moment in your life.
Okay.
That will kind of tie it together. Let's talk about John.
John was someone that I was very enamored with. I'm long before I was in Hollywood, like watching his films and watching, him not just do Apocalypse Now or Dirty Harry or Conan, but, and Red Dawn, and realizing that the same person was the creator, because it's not like it is today. So we weren't really, as audience goers, aware that like John Milius was this creative that was, we might know it was Coppola, we might know it was, we didn't know John Milius was like the director and writer of it. Wasn't, this auteur badge that you got to wear. So for me to follow that and realize that we had the ability to know that this is the same creator that did all of these different genres of films, then I had always, wanted to meet him. And for me, part of the reason I got into this business was to meet my heroes. I really wanted to meet as many as I could and extract any information I could from them. So I knew someone who knew John, and they introduced me to him, and we got along great immediately. And we immediately like went and sold a show together. And he was so ingratiating, but he would teach me things about writing that were not standard fare. I mean, I think I talked about something on my social media where it was, he was talking about, he was writing a Genghis Khan biopic at the time. I said Genghis Cohen, but it's Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan's a fantastic
Did it
Chinese food.
reopen actually?
They did reopen.
We should
Mark, oh yeah, Mark Rose, who owns it, great guy, great friend. We should go.
Yes.
I'll go anytime. By the way, all I have to do is mention it, and oh, I love it so much. Okay, so um, I said, he taught me about, he was writing this Genghis Khan biopic, and he said to me, people think violence is quick and it's flashy and it's action and he's like, violence is slow and grueling and horrible. And that's how it should be written, and it's little things like that you start to go like, you can't really teach yourself that. Like maybe you can if you are someone who embeds and does research like I do, but even with all the embedding and research I had done, I didn't learn that, and that's just one tiny thing.
Yeah, for instance, like as far as craft is concerned, when you're writing it, how does it look on the page? And different writers have different styles. Some they're like 2 to 4 sentences. Some are like long prose, depending on who the writer is.
Mhm.
What's your style?
John always told me no more than 6 sentences,
Gotcha.
especially if you're doing some kind of
Like
violence or war
Yeah.
or action, like no more than 6 sentences, and you could make it less depending on how much punch you want. But, it was always about, especially with John, it was always about, sitting down every day, and it's like, he would say, "Are the movie gods going to be good to me today?" And
So
it's
it's like how Conan of him.
yeah. I mean, but that's the thing, right? You see the voice. You hear the voice. You realize that that's the thing that separates. Anyone could take a script and write a script. The structure of writing a script, it's a blueprint for a movie, or it's a blueprint for a TV show. People don't go to bed and go like, I'm going to curl up with my favorite script. They read books. Like we do something that is very specialized.
Are you a fan of the adage, in order to write more, you need to read more?
You know, this has been this big debate, right, on X that I noticed, and professor said it, and you can't write if you don't read. I I think it's all potluck. I think it's basically like, I know people that are incredibly talented and all they did was watch movies and TV, and that's where it came from. I know other people who, never read anything or don't really watch other things because they don't want to be influenced, and they're fantastic writers. So I think it's really just based on the person. I don't think anything is, you have to do this, you have to do that. I mean, it's talent. Talent is in and of itself, it's a non sequitur.
Yeah, I mean, talent plus discipline to actually sit, get your butt in the chair, and
Well, that's different. If you ask me if someone has to have discipline, I'll say yes, there's no way around that. Like,
yeah.
if you be the most talented person in the world, if you're not sitting down with the regiment, attacking entropy and chaos every day, making sure your workstation, your desk, wherever you work, is completely clean and everything is good, and you're not surrounded by chaos and you're not doing it every day, you're not going to end up being what you think you're going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen different approaches. I've read On Writing by Stephen King. He talks about that space. Then you see people that, I got to write in a coffee shop because the white noise helps me kind of lock in for whatever reason.
Is that what people say?
Some people.
I don't.
It's like an average. It's not a singular person, but some people.
I think it's the Family Guy joke for me, where they always say like, "Oh, look at that," they're writing in a coffee shop so other people can see their writing.
And it might be that.
I mean, but I just never could understand the public uh, uh, aspect of like writing. There was a time when I was writing my novel that's coming out, that I've never written in public, and there was something that came to me because all we are channels, right? We just channel stuff. I've never had a great idea myself. It's something that hits me when I'm in the hypnagogic state. It's something that hits me if I'm on a road trip, and it's channeled. My brain doesn't come up with things. I get handed
Have
gifts.
you nourish the space to channel meditation, dreams, journaling?
All three. Meditation every morning, 8 to 9. So I'll wake up at 7:58, go to the bathroom, get back in bed, put on the gear, meditate for an hour. Every 7 days a week. That is, and then wake up, I have certain other things that I do from let's say 9 to 10. Writing, writing emails and answering them, doing my social media posts for this Hollywood War Room thing I do, and right now it's doing the pre-sale promotion on the books, which I never knew anything about before this.
Yeah, well, we're gonna talk about
You
that.
know,
And congratulations on that endeavor.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. But to finish, I will, wake up, I'll do that. Then at 10 o'clock, I'm into it. Whatever it is I'm doing, and it doesn't matter if I write crap. It has no bearing. But
Just getting it on the page.
yeah, there's no reason you can't write. If you're writing a book, for example, there's no reason you can't be writing 2,000 words a day. And that's light.
It's funny. I saw a YouTube video where George Martin and Stephen King were talking.
Two of the greats just sitting around.
Just sitting around
BSing.
talking together, and then George is like, "How many pages do you write a day?" It's like, Steve's like, "I usually write like 6." And George is like, "What are you talking about? I'm lucky if I get 1 to 3."
But he does it.
But he does it, yeah.
Every day.
Yeah.
It's like, though George R. Martin has been talking recently about his writer's block and why things haven't been finished but either way, he's doing it. That being said, I've never really got writer's block. I don't want to write. I really don't want to write. I really am going to leave this for the last minute. I've done that. But I've never been in a position where I've been like, I can't even get a thought in, because I don't think, again, we take our trauma and our experiences and we combine them with whatever the universe is transmitting.
So based off of that, was Warrior based off of that experience of trauma and survival?
Yeah. So there's a few things that came together with Warrior. The first thing was, well, okay, so that's a really interesting question. So the first thing was, I was a big MMA fan, but Rocky is one of my, it's in my top 5 favorite movies. And I was always very aware that Rocky was never a boxing film. It was a film about a dysfunctional family. If you look at the boxing time in Rocky, it's like 20 something minutes that they spend in the ring. Everything else is this effed up relationship with Adrian and Paulie and Mick, and dealing with all of that and his job and how his life went wrong, and the fact that his family is 2 turtles, Cuff and Link. And I was obsessed with that movie. I loved MMA, and I was sitting around. I had kind of aha moment, we'll call it, where it's MMA was at a place. It was around 2009, I'd say, late 2008. And David Mamet had just done Red Belt. I had done a non-credited rewrite on Never Back Down, the first one with Gavin O'Connor. And I just had this moment where I was like, there needs to be an MMA movie that is Rocky, where, I go, if it was 2 brothers and we didn't know who to root for, that would be like basically the equivalent of how we could do something that's interesting. And if we, have this really sort of dysfunctional family idea, then the MMA and the tournament and Sparta, so to speak, is the candy wrapping. That's the world we'll wrap it in, because, if I'm going to do, we're not making the lighthouse, so, okay, how do we disguise this and make this into something that is accessible for people? Then, there were a few things. The woman who adopted me, my mother, Ellen, she was an English teacher. So I grew up at times going to school with her in the city in Brooklyn. And she had a crazy principal, this guy, Mr. Fino. And so Principal Zito became him, right, in the thing. And then I was always going to be, I never wanted to do this business. I wanted to be an Army Ranger. I was ROTC. I was, I was moving towards that. My recruiter lied to me. My whole life changed. I was I really did. I was what's called ENE'd, which is eligible and not enlisted. And then my life kind of changed on a dime. And but I've always been very pro-military and very, I don't care about politics. I just support the men and women who are in our services. And I'm very knowledgeable about everything military. So for me, Tommy became my alter ego. I made him Force One, Recon, Marine, him being a hero. All of that was that side. The side with Brendan was the teacher side. That was Ellen and teaching. And at the same time, because of the writer's strike at that time, I was losing my house, going bankrupt and about to be unhoused. And so I was squatting in my foreclosed townhouse. And that's where that comes from. That's why Brendan's losing his house. And my kid was like 4 years old.
But it's interesting how circumstances can like cause diamonds where you're under this pressure. I gotta turn this story out, but because of your exercises, you can kind of channel that.
Yes,
I hear William Peter Blatty did the same thing when he wrote The Exorcist.
he did. I'm
Like-
friends
like-
with his son.
Like he wrote it in like no outlining, he just
Yeah,
which is crazy to me.
yeah.
Makes a lot of sense, but it's what's crazy to me.
But sometimes, listen, I've written things without outlines, for sure. Warrior was not one of them. We did 3 months of story on that, every tiny little piece was.
But if you talk to the non-initiated and you're writing, it's like, oh, the characters talk to me, and people look at you like you have 9 heads. No, they actually talk to you, and they write it for you if everything is lined up.
This is 1,000,000% true. I love talking about this because I believe that as writers, we create these sort of hallucinogenic realities that, we live in first. And if they're real enough, we build these worlds that other people can crawl inside and live in. And that's how they escape. The same way we do. We're just trying to get out of our thing.
But the interesting part about it, if you stay in the truth of that, it is cathartic, and that's how you build fans and followings as an artist.
Yes.
Agreed. Craziest, like from the Centipede trilogy to the Golden Girls.
Yeah.
There's an audience for it.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the issues that writers in our business have had is Hollywood keeps us away from our audience. We, and social media has kind of been changing that, but that's what I've always admired about book authors. They have a direct connection to their audience, to their people, and they get feedback. They know what they like. They know what works in certain books and what doesn't. And we don't really get that. We just get critics talking about what it is they didn't like about the movie, and the movie is not all ours. It's nothing in film or television is done in a vacuum. There's no, there's 200 people.
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to think it'd be a vacuum, but that's usually
Sure.
not the case.
Oh,
Speaking of books, let's talk about Crime Family.
yeah, sure. This is my first novel, and it's a Post Hill Press and Simon & Schuster. It's coming out July 21st. And so I started writing it. That was like a fever dream. I'm adopted, and I was adopted from this very infamous adoption agency called Louise Wise. And Louise Wise was, you ever see Three Identical Strangers?
Probably.
It was where the kid finds out he has triplets, and they were all separated at birth by this illegal human experiment that this Dr. P.B. Neubauer did. And so he found out he had triplets. And then I was adopted from the same place in the same years that they were performing the Viola, Dr. Viola and Dr. Neubauer were performing these completely illegal experiments on babies. That was a study on nature versus nurture.
Not on you.
Oh, no.
Okay.
So this is what I find. No, on me. No, this is what I find out. So when this adoption thing breaks and they do this documentary, which was very successful, it's the first I heard of it. I'm like, holy, wait a minute. What years was this done? So I start, and then I call the lawyers. They checked who I was, and I find out that I am the only single study participant that was involved in this. And it was because Louise Wise is a Jewish adoption agency. So the mother has to be Jewish, and they tell me that, and by the way, this study is locked up at Yale University until 2065 because Neubauer didn't want to be alive. Thought people would kill him probably, so he locked up the study. No one can see the findings. So I find out that I am a single occupant study And the reason was because my biological mother was Jewish and my biological father, who I do not know who it is, to this day, was a Delano Roosevelt. So I'm a direct descendant of FDR.
Wow.
And yeah, they can trace my, whatever that heritage is because I don't know it. It's not like mine per se, it's just blood, but they can trace that back to like one of my ancestors signing the Mayflower Treaty.
That's crazy. This is like an episode of Maury Povich. Or you might be a superhero.
I mean,
Cliff Dorfman sounds like a great alter ego for a superhero.
it does, you're right. I agree with you. That's now I might log that.
There you go.
So I found out that they knew, because of that, they had a better than average chance because I was born blonde hair, blue eyes. So they thought putting me in a Orthodox or modern Orthodox Jewish family and community in Merrick, Long Island was going to really be a true test of nature versus nurture. Like, how was I going to come out? And they put me in this family, and it was a very abusive upbringing. And it was not fun. Uh, and really, if they hadn't done that, I'd be in a Protestant, adoption agency, and I would have been a Brahmin, Boston Brahmin, like a first family. And so I find all this out. And at the same time, literally within I'm saying within a few years, like of this, finding this out, I find all these text messages that I was never supposed to see. And they were between people who I thought were my family because, again, I was adopted and I was gaslit my entire life, So you're gaslit, you have abuse, you're raised by narcissists and malignant narcissists, and you find all this stuff that everything you thought was happening, everything you said, I know this is happening. I know this is what you're doing to me. I know that you're crazy. You're lying. That's not true. And then you find it all. And your whole worldview is just blown. And the only way I knew how to deal with that was to fictionalize it.
Which is the healthiest way you can do it, and that's how most writers are created, folks.
Yeah. By the way, big piece of trauma.
Writers and comedians.
Yeah. Oh, I've never met a happy comedian.
Yeah.
I mean, the best comedians, Bob Saget, who was one of my best friends, he was always upset about something. Like he was always very dark, rest in power. It's great art does not come from happiness. If we're able to find a way to translate our trauma to you where you can feel it and then somehow feel better toward the end of it by reading it or watching it, then we have to not be normal. Like there has to be something going on with us. So I think that's the first thing. If you're normal, no one normal ends up in our business. So I have ADHD. It's like these things are not, and I have a tremendous amount of trauma growing up and, even in adolescence and adulthood, and how are you going to deal with it? What are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean,
every time I've put it down, I've been able to release a piece of it.
Yeah, there's a catharsis to art that I don't think people realize on the outside looking in happens, whether it's playing music, writing, acting. When you step between those lines and the collaboration when everyone's on a singular vision, that's what we keep getting up for.
Yeah.
Not the bureaucracy and all the nonsense later for that stuff, but it's when you step between those lines.
The creative. And I think what you said is very important. That's what you keep getting up for. Because there's a lot of days, especially when you live through whatever you live through, that you don't want to get up. You're like, I don't really want to, I'm not finding joy in this life, but then the work. And you start and you continue doing the work. And from that comes joy. From that comes a relief and a freedom.
Yeah. What do you hope people derive from Crime Family?
Well, I think for me, Crime Family is for every child of abuse, every survivor, and it is to be able to realize that there's a lot of us out there and that there is no winning. Like one of the biggest problems when you write a character, especially if it's let's say, I don't want to say antagonist because I don't necessarily love those terms. I feel like everything should be in gray to some degree when you're writing because that's how our lives are. Everything's gray. Black and white is not cognitive thinking. Gray is where everything lives. So, but when you have a character who you really want, because you want your lead to win. That's something you do want. And when you have a character they're up against that is a malignant narcissist, one of the things that I had to realize on the journey of writing that was there's no winning against a malignant narcissist because they will never see things your way. Doesn't matter where they end up. They could end up in the electric chair. They could end up in prison. They could end up, destitute and unhoused. They will always think it's someone else's fault. So there is no true winning. So the only winning comes from letting go. And I hope people get to see that. And I'll just do an add-on, which is I hope people get to see that there are other ways out of the trauma than you think. And even if you're not a writer, you can go and write your way out of something, even if it just sits in a drawer, because it is so incredibly therapeutic.
Yeah. What process did you find harder, writing scripts or novels?
I would say writing scripts. This novel was, I think I had the most interactive, like I've created a lot of universes in writing scripts, and I've dabbled living in them, as I was writing them. With Crime Family, I basically moved in. I would wake up in the morning and I'd be like, almost like sad that I wasn't Chase and I wasn't with Kendra, and I was like, I want that relationship, like I like living here. And so while it was incredibly painful to write, I would say it was one of the best experiences I had because there's a tremendous amount of freedom that you have when you're writing. And one of the biggest things I always got with scripts was you novelize too much. Stop with the details. Stop,
Show
leaner.
rather than tell, as
Well,
they say.
not even that. I was doing, well, no, you were right. It is.
Okay.
It is.
We have about less than a minute left. Any words of wisdom that you want to impart to the audience out there about their journey as creatives?
Yeah, I would say that if you're really seriously, is this camera on? Is this one?
Yeah, that's
Okay. If you're really seriously thinking about getting into this business, and I say this with all the love in the world, this is exactly what you have to do. Run. Do not do it. Find anything else you could possibly do and then do that. If then you are at a place where you're like, no, I'm still doing this, then the only thing I would say is discipline. It is the work. And then it is getting out there. It's not being afraid to show people your work. Don't write 10 scripts and not show anybody. Show people. You don't have to talk to people about it while you're doing it, but make sure. Submit them to festivals, submit them to workshops, work with friends, work with other actors, because just the sheer act of creating that energy gives us careers sometimes in the weirdest ways that we don't even see happening.
There's a gravity to it.
There is.
But faith without works is dead, as they say.
Amen.
And it's been a pleasure having you on. I wanted to talk to you briefly about meeting George Carlin, but we're running out of time.
That was a big aha moment too.
That was a big aha moment.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because you met him backstage.
Well, I didn't just meet him backstage. It was
You had conversations with the man, yeah?
No, I Saturday Night Live, when it was first on the air, first at least 10 years or so, they would say, accommodations for guests of Saturday Night Live are furnished by the Berkshire Hathaway, right? So obsessed with the business, I was like, oh, that means you're telling me that they're staying at the Berkshire Hathaway. So I picked up the phone, and George Carlin, I couldn't be a bigger fan, and I called up the Berkshire Hathaway, and I was like, George Carlin's room, please. And he answered, and I said, hey, this is Cliff Dorfman. I write for my high school paper, which at the time I didn't. I was like, and I'd love to interview you. I think you're going to be at Westbury Music Fair. And he was it was like this moment where it's like, oh, they are just people too. And he was like, yes, of course, I'm going to give you 2 tickets. I'm going to give you backstage passes. I took my buddy Scott Stamell with me from high school. He still talks about it to this day. We went to Westbury Music Fair. We watched the show, and then we went backstage, and I got to sit with George Carlin for like an hour and a half and interview him. And it was that moment where it was like, oh, I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to be in this business.
I'd like to thank my guest, Cliff Dorfman. It's been a wonderful time.
Yes, thank you.
And it's been another wonderful episode of Pan and Zoom. I'm your host, Sati Gossett. And until then, keep on filming.
Untouchable, uncrushable. Untouchable, uncrushable. Untouchable, uncrushable.